MCAT 2017 Cram, Critical Analysis and Reasoning Skills, Flashcard Set 8.2, Film Adaptation of Chinese Literature. As you view the reading of this passage, you'll notice a highlighted section of text. What I want you to do is garner meaning from this selection in order to answer the reasoning beyond the text question that follows at the end. Okay? This question will require you to demonstrate that you know how to extrapolate the ideas in the passage to new situations, specifically the situation presented in the question stem. So you'll have to demonstrate an understanding of the assumptions underlying this article and how new information in the question stem and answer choices will shift the central thesis. All right, so good luck and happy reading, or happy viewing rather. Paragraph 1. The studies of adaptation tend to privilege literature over film, but not the other way around, and assume that a film adaptation has certain responsibility to remain faithful to the spirit of the text upon which it is based. The main purpose of Hsu Huang Detman's book, adapted for the screen, The Cultural Politics of Modern Chinese Fiction and Film, I would argue, is to provide some alternative thoughts besides. This assumption of how film and fiction should be viewed in adaptation studies. Detman is interested in how filmmakers have gone about the business and art of transposition from one medium to another. This transposition and the processes involved in it, in turn, enrich our understanding of the interconnectedness of the cultural context of texts and artists in Chinese films and fictions. In other words, Detman does not simply deal with the issue of what can be transferred in moving from fiction to film, namely narrative, and what cannot be. More importantly, she investigates the distinct ideological goals of writer and filmmaker that contribute to the differences between text and films. Paragraph 2. Detman looks at the connections between film and fiction in the context of various Chinese communities on the one hand and contemplates their differences on the other hand. For example, one case study that Detman uses to illustrate gender politics is the adaptation of Su Tong's novel Wives and Concubines into Zhang Yimou's film Raise the Red Lantern. Detman argues that Zhang draws from the strengths of Su's plots and reconfigures the story's narrative codes, notably transforming a key symbolic site in the novel. A defunct meaning no longer functioning, definitions are not a part of the original text. Well in a back garden, into a rooftop death chamber. As a result, Song's new metaphor illustrates the important directional option of changing the staging of the story to maximize the cinematic effect. The well in the novella, a novella is a short novel or a long story, and the compound roof in the film not only map out key theoretical differences between the two texts, but the distinct approaches to the exploitation of women also reflect profoundly different conceptions of the relationship between art and society. These two metaphorical spaces, Detman suggests, not only juxtapose meaning place or deal close together for contrasting effect, the fluidity of feminine ambivalence, ambivalence meaning the state of having mixed feelings or contradictory ideas about something or someone, with the solidity of the patriarch's iron rule, but also open up very distinct imaginary space for the reader and the viewer. Paragraph 3. Many scholars argue that the one thing that literature and film have in common is narrative. By narrative, I mean a series of events, sequentially connected by virtue of their involving a continuing set of characters. Detman questions this assumption in her book. One example is the adaptation of Liu Yichang's novel Intersection into Wong Kar-wai's film In the Mood for Love. In Detman's analysis, Wong appears to radically distill Liu's novel into something other than 3 frames containing 3 separate quotations: the opening shot, an intertitle, and a concluding still. Instead of reconstructing the literary narrative, Wong creates a new storyline, thereby challenging the assumption shared by many adaptation scholars that narrative is the property that makes two media commensurable. Commensurable meaning measurable by the same standard. Liberating filmic adaptation from almost every question of fidelity. Wong's style pushes us to recognize that Detman calls what Detman calls abstract adaptation, a style that creates a new theoretical dialogue about how film and literature can intersect to reproduce aesthetic resonances. Resonances here meaning a quality that makes something personally meaningful or important to someone. Detman refuses to privilege one reading or form over another and remains focused on the distinct ways in which they have been received. All right. Because of changes in technology, it may soon become common for filmic versions to precede textual versions and for literary work to be created as adaptation of films. Which position would Detman be most likely to argue? A. The reversal helps to privilege film over literature. B. The writer should feel compelled to preserve the essence of the film. C. Books should be seen as adaptations if the author claims that they are. Or D. Literary works should always be privileged over film. Definitely press pause if you need to and open up a second window to view the reading of the passage in search of the text to support your answer. I'll give you a moment to think. All right, hopefully by now you've arrived at the correct answer, and if not, that's totally fine. Let's take a look at how to go about solving this and what the correct answer choice is. Okay, so the formatting of this question stem is reasoning beyond the text because you have to apply or extrapolate the ideas in the passage to this new situation of filmic versions preceding textual versions of literary work or art form. And it's important to understand the assumptions underlying the article in order to do this and how new information may or may not shift the central thesis of the passage in relation to this new situation. Okay, so the entire passage is based on the premise that adaptation scholars hold an overly narrow view of what film adaptation is. It would be hypocritical for the author to take the position that reversal would help film over literature. Answer choice A, so that's going to be eliminated. Okay? Or to believe that literary works will always be privileged over film. The always in this means it's an extreme answer, and usually extreme answers are incorrect in the car section of the MCAT exam. Okay? Scholars, the passage explains, normally assume that a film adaptation must attempt to preserve the narrative and essence of the original written work. This is what's mentioned in answer choice B, okay? But Detman takes issue with this. The author rejects the narrow definition that adaptation scholars impose on the filmmakers. So it's reasonable to assume that if an artist claims that their film is an artistic adaptation of a text, Detman would view the film as an adaptation within its own independent artistic value, okay? So the reverse would probably be true in the case of a text adaptation of a film as well. So the correct answer choice is answer choice C. Books should be seen as adaptations if the